ですか?
If you've ever been curious about just how different the official Mother novel is from the game it's based on, you should know that in this interpretation, when our protagonist Ninten first encounters Giygas, his instinct is to call him a bastard and throw a grenade at him. Welcome to Dark Aspects of the Mother novels, a complete analysis of the darker moments present in author Saori Kumi's retelling of the first two games by Shigesato Itoi. This episode will be a comprehensive overview of the first book, which does include spoilers pretty much immediately, so I recommend reading it first if you have any interest in doing so. I want to turn this comment section into a book club. In my last related video about the decades-long journey to getting these Japanese novels translated into English, I mentioned that the first story is all about Ninten, or as he's referred to in this fine piece of literature, Ken. However, he isn't exactly the main character. He's one of them as a chosen hero for sure, but in a move I think made for a more interesting read, the book actually takes place right before Anna joins Ninten/Ken and Lloyd's party, because this story is told through the perspective of Anna, who is 100% a better character than Ken here, at least in terms of attitude. This author's version of Ninten is a loud, rude, and crude kid with no patience for anything except his mission, which is to save the world, yes, but nevertheless, he's a butthead most of the time. Ken does have a couple of redeeming factors though, like his wholesome, unbreakable friendship with Lloyd. They still fight, and Ken picks on him occasionally for being a burden, but despite his low tolerance for other people's problems, he's surprisingly accommodating. Lloyd himself is a genius with technology, but laments his all-eggs-in-one-basket expertise, as it's no help in saving his mother, who's dying from an illness that can supposedly only be treated with the incredibly rare cannon flower, which is amusingly not canon in the game. Curing his mom is a major reason why he's joined forces with Ken and Anna as an ally of justice, a member of what they've dubbed the Global Defense Force, with the ultimate goal of saving their planet from a certain universal cosmic destroyer. While the Famicom/NES Ninten and Anna were clearly interested in each other romantically, that really isn't the case with Ken and Anna. Since we do get a lot of internal monologue from Anna in the book, we see that she despises him in a lot of ways, but does, while she'd never admit it out loud, have several moments where she's crushing on the kid. As I was reading each chapter and getting closer to the end of the book, I kept wondering to myself what the author's version of the game's intimate dance scene could even be, assuming Kumi decided to reference it at all. These characters are friends, but they still don't really get along all that well towards the end of their adventure. So I just couldn't picture it. But of course, Kumi found an interesting workaround, in the vein of Mother 2's Moon Side and Mother 3's Tane Tane Island. That's right, Mother 1 now gets its own hallucinogenic sequence outside of Magicant, involving the consumption of holy water in a limestone cavern. Utterly alluring Anna with some unseen power, the reportedly 500 feet deep pool of crystal clear water calls out to her, drawing the girl in with an irresistible force until she can't fight back. It convinces her that she wouldn't mind drifting forever and ever into eternity within its serene depths, a pure blue that happens to be the same color as Ken's eyes. The lake water is supposed to be freezing cold, and is known to have sent a good number of divers to their doom, but when Anna touches it, the refreshing sensation is so vivid that her own body and heart feel lukewarm and tainted in comparison. She then clumsily scoops up the beautiful blue with her hands and brings it to her lips, sipping the delicious, cell-changing, sensory overload water that tastes like moonlight. When Ken is convinced to drink it for himself, the two stare into each other's eyes, and an intense passion they think is love overtakes them in that moment. They become so absorbed in each other's love, in fact, that they don't even notice the war zone of gunfire that surrounds them. Their new psychic shield keeps them completely safe to indulge in this newfound bliss, which the robots catch on to and, as a result, proceed to target the only vulnerable hero left, Hurricane Joe, aka Teddy from the original, who's described here as a bear-like man donning two bandoliers in the shape of an X, with a carbine gun slung over his shoulder while wielding a machete. He can down 8 beers no problem, and slap away an entire motorcycle with his bare, open hand without twitching. When Ken and Anna finally come to from their trance, they suddenly realize what had taken place around them with a whiff of the copious amount of blood, and Joe's severely injured body collapsed onto the floor, with no memory of their special moment together. I think this was a brilliant equivalent to the game's events, where Teddy is gravely wounded in an unwinnable encounter. Before that life-threatening ordeal, Ninten and Anna legitimately confess their feelings for each other without drinking a mind-altering substance, then dance with one another, similar to Ken and Anna here enveloping themselves to be as close as possible inside of an invincible bubble. If that description of what happened to Joe was any indication, the battles in this book are much more descriptively violent than their in-game counterparts. This makes sense, as while nothing overly gruesome is ever shown on screen in Mother, some of the implications of the turn-based fights, like Ninten using a baseball bat to beat possessed zoo animals, suggest some pretty intense battle scenarios. The novel trio's first fisticuffs is described as early as Chapter 2, when Ken, Lloyd, and Anna are circled by 4 giant voracious white wolves with breath that smells of blood. Their teeth are as sharp as knives, and behind the rows of those ferocious fangs are rolling, twitching tongues tinged with black. Unlike the game, we're told explicitly what kind of a blow Ken lands with his bat, an explosive 3-base hit to the muzzle he reportedly takes great pride in. Right before the wolves retreat into the depths of the forest, they collapse in the snow as their legs begin to convulse, while the evil possession seems to drain from their faces. That's nothing compared to the next ambush, though, involving hordes upon hordes of seemingly endless bloodthirsty mice, summoned by what Anna thought was a friendly one. Countless mice with pointed teeth ready to tear the 3 of them to shreds form into a tall, fuzzy mass leveled to the top of Lloyd's head, and spread wide to cover every square inch of the floor, like some awful mousy carpeting. They gnaw and thrash around, targeting any exposed skin they can sink their teeth into. A ghastly predicament straight out of a nightmare. Anna is blinded from a series of tail whips and starts to lose consciousness because of the sheer quantity of rodents overwhelming her. And when she falls to the ground, she hears the pitiful little chirps of mice who are now pinned underneath her. Ken does end up rescuing her, but it's now time to talk about the character I, and English fan translator Nyaasu think is the best in the novel, Lloyd. It is Lloyd who first shows kindness towards Anna, and even makes a move on her about 20 pages in by giving what Anna describes as a terribly brief kiss on her hand. Fun fact, this excerpt was the first of Kenisu's translations he and Mato decided to post on EarthBound Central, which actually inadvertently soured some fans on reading it, because they thought the entire book was just going to be some cheap, mushy teen romance novel. The comment section here is pretty funny. Of course, romance is not the main focus of this adventure at all. But I did want to talk about one of my favorite related moments involving Lloyd, when he agrees to marry off Ken, without Ken's permission, mind you, to the owner of the Rosemary Mansion's daughter for his blessing to enter the property. The funniest thing about this, besides Ken absolutely exploding in anger when he finds out, is the fact that his apparent future father-in-law supports and encourages his daughter's desire to be wed to this boy, having only just met him, and despite his complete lack of decency. Wolfing down food at a fancy feast offered by Mr. Rosewater, Ken lets out an enormously offensive belch after their host opens his heart to talk about the purity and happiness he wishes for his daughter. Everyone in the room falls dead silent, but the man continues on by feigning ignorance. This genuinely got a laugh out of me. Progressing chronologically from here, the hero's search for 8 magical melodies takes them to the Yucca Desert, rumored to have been the site of a battle fought long ago between countries. It's an area haunted by the spirits of those who died in this conflict, with an impressive -103 skull and crossbones tourist rating. Later, when a formation of UFOs is spotted overhead, the lot of them duck down into the shadows of the sand dunes. However, Lloyd is delirious and wants to see the flying saucers, so he crawls on all fours to get a better view, but is greeted by a scorpion instead. Anna uses her ability to telepathically communicate with creatures to calm it down, but unfortunately, as soon as Lloyd safely backs away, Ken sends the no longer threatening scorpion's helpless, tiny red body flying into the distance. My own grandmother doesn't have psychic powers to lull scorpions out of stinging or anything like that, but she does live in Arizona, like me, and has had to land several smash attacks on hostile scorpions that have invaded her home. One of them even snuck its way inside the pages of a book she was reading. Seriously. I just wanted to tell that story as this is a legitimate trope about the desert, but so is the wonderful stargazing out here, so don't hesitate to visit. Because Ken smacked an innocent scorpion with his bat, he and Anna yell at each other about how an ally of justice should be acting, and then she starts praying for him, which is amazing. The old man of the desert considers himself a gravekeeper of sorts, since so many of the men who were once under his command are now at rest beneath the sand. That's why he's never been able to bring himself to leave. He also owns a creepy blood-sucking plant with petals in the shape of lips that ask to be fed, stored away in a greenhouse along with a singing cactus fans of the game might recognize. Or so he thinks, but it looks like the thing sprouted legs and ran away. But not to worry, there are more singing cacti in the ruins occupied by monkeys, hidden deep within the desert. These ruins seem far more dangerous to navigate than they were in-game, as AnnK accidentally activates a death trap that makes the earth around her tremble and the architecture crumble, causing some of the monkeys to either fall off of or be crushed by falling pieces of the ruined walls. Huge fissures crack open beneath her and the boy's feet, revealing wide, deep chasms that would certainly bring them to their demise if they fell in. All of this madness eventually leads the heroes through a portal to Magicant, a world which curiously makes AnnK feel a bit of blackness in her heart, as an innate rejection of the nauseating pink atmosphere, and the boys' over-enthusiasm in being here. To be fair, it isn't their fault. They seem to be entranced, as if they're love-struck, stuck in a dreamy, thoughtless, too-happy state that sickens AnnK. My favorite description of them in Magicant is as follows. Those overly familiar girls were very insistent as they led Ken steadily onward, tugging at his hands. Lloyd called after them in a very nasal voice, saying something like, "Aw, wait for me." And then, like a butterfly charmed by nectar, he fluttered off to join them. Her black-tainted heart in this strange place also comes from a place of concern and anxiety. As they enter Queen Mary's castle, the distance between her and the boys never seemed to close in, despite her quickened pace, as she catches fleeting glimpses of them from behind, whenever they all turn a corner. She then has a twisted vision of them not remembering AnnK's name, with their eyes turning a hazy, sugary shade of pink to match this blushing dreamland. The soldiers of the Queen's throne room are intimidating, as they wield spears adorned with cords colored wine red, giving them the dreadful appearance of having just finished stabbing someone to death. AnnK speaking up against the Queen, whisking them away to her fantasy to indulge while the real world is suffering, even in fear of being executed, is a great character moment for her. Queen Mary is fortunately not malicious, but does admit to doting over her children a bit too much. She brought them here for that selfish reason, but also to give them gifts, blessed with attributes best suited for the intended recipient, similar to Father Christmas of Narnia and his presents, while also successfully conveying that feeling of earning endgame equipment in an RPG. Each armor piece is bestowed with a magical ability. Ken's new baseball hat brings him strength as a leader by encouraging those with righteous hearts to follow him without hesitation. Lloyd's snazzy pair of glasses help boost his mental acuity like a wisdom capsule, and a glittering heart-shaped necklace for AnnK has comparatively vague powers of love, truth, and hope that channels her natural ability to awaken boys from their delusions and turn them into real men, or something like that. Now that the heroes are geared up, but before moving on from Queen Mary's domain, I want to highlight a notable quote, suggesting that her dreamy country never truly vanishes when her completed song is sung, unlike what happens in the game. This is a place that anyone may call home, as it remains in the depths of one's subconscious for all of eternity. Taking off their figurative rose-tinted goggles, lands the Warriors of Justice in Youngtown, where all the adults have been puzzlingly abducted and taken to Mountie Toy. This was also the place AnnK's own mother went missing, when she had to travel here on business for the church. With all these lost children yet no one to supervise them, an orphan named Amy seized the opportunity to take control. Apparently, there were a good number of kids who mistakenly thought that they could become the boss here, but they've all been sorted out by being knocked out with Amy's right-hand punch. This society without grown-ups is where the gang also meets Noelle, the psychokinetic-powered baby with abilities that surpass even AnnK, who senses and can teleport the party to the next melody, located in the notoriously dangerous LA, famous for drugs, violence, and crime. An amazing Lloyd moment in this chapter is the boy leisurely strolling towards a group of violent bikers, with Joe, aka Teddy if you've forgotten, as their leader, to fix his motorcycle for him, since this version of Lloyd's backstory involves a history of illegally copying and modding electronic bike software for money, so he's had plenty of experience. In this town that good little children are forbidden to visit, AnnK spots a lone, dainty-looking gold-colored shoe by a bush. When she picks it up to get a closer look, she hears giggling from beyond the brush, and sees 2 or 3 pairs of bare legs, which makes her turn red all the way up to her ears. When the kids finally find a seemingly normal adult they can actually speak with, an elderly woman feeding animals in the park, she jumps and runs at the sight of them. There's also another pair of wild women waiting in the huge line gathered at the live house. One is practically naked, while the other walks around kissing anyone she can find. What I find to be truly funny, though, is that before the gang winds up being conned by purchasing fake passes, this book, based on a Nintendo game, blatantly tells us what the definition of a scalper is, as if we Nintendo fans aren't already well aware. To be fair, this was written in 1989, so I guess Kumi couldn't predict the sorry state of Amiibo, and any other limited edition Nintendo merchandise to come. Ken, Anna, and Lloyd need tickets to the live show, because that's where they think they'll hear the next melody, alongside some no doubt sinful, degenerate rock and roll music. Thankfully, despite being duped by a fraudulent ticket seller, Lloyd now knows a guy, that guy being Joe, the main performer everyone's apparently lining up to see. Now backstage, Lloyd quickly narrows in on the aforementioned cannon flower imperative to his personal mission at Joe's gift table, and secures it in spite of an ineffectual display of begging. In a panic to rush home to Marysville for the first time since the boys' initial departure, Anna mistakenly wakes up an already groggy Noel, who accidentally expends even more of his energy than necessary by teleporting everyone in the room, band members included, to Lloyd's hometown. Because Noel's powers are dependent on how well fed and rested he is, this happening towards the end of the story was a great way to ensure that they all can't just warp to Mountie Toy for the final battle. Their fastest method of transportation is going to be dead asleep for a long while. So a group of them plan to make the arduous trip up the mountain themselves, aided by one of the Rockstar's SUVs. While in this ironically named town, both Ken and Lloyd learn that their mothers, along with every other mother, have been taken from their homes in Podunk and Marysville respectively by spaceships. Unlike Youngtown though, the rest of the adults were left behind, so they all banded together and agreed to wage war against the aliens, jointly pooling whatever they could use as weapons, then heading off to storm Mountie Toy. The only ones holding down the fort, so to speak, are self-described useless old men like Lloyd's neighbor and Ken's younger twin sisters who've been living in fear this entire time. Bawling in desperation with the special cannon flower in hand, Lloyd finds his house completely vacant and freaks out by presuming his mother's already passed. But he is ultimately able to coax himself out of a panic attack and calm down by planting the flowers safely in their backyard garden with hope in his heart that she'll make it home okay. Anna was the only one in their group who saw this coming, and not through some premonition. She noticed that the huge fleet of saucers they all spotted back in the desert were flying in the direction of Marysville, but she didn't say anything to the boys in fear of deflating their will to soldier on. Lloyd's elderly neighbor Sam fills them all in on the remaining adults' rescue plan, despite it being doomed to fail because of Giygas' near impenetrable psychic barrier. He notes the strange nature of Earth's animals and humans being hypnotized at random, along with all the mothers here specifically having been kidnapped, as if the enemy is desperately searching for something. Sam is closer than he probably realizes in solving this mystery, as Giygas is searching for something, or more specifically, someone, his own mom. In the original game, Giygas stored his human prisoners inside of test tubes within a cave near Mountie Toy's summit, which had disconcerting implications for sure, but the descriptions of the brainwashed adults held captive at the mountain base in this book are far more disconcerting. Anna sees firsthand a huge crowd of possessed, injured-looking adults, covered in dirt, grease, grime, and sweat. She can hardly tell the difference between them all, as they've chaotically piled up on top of each other like one single living mass, with what may be corpses mixed in. Among the horde are friends of Anna's family, including Lily's mom, Natalie, a churchgoer who's now under Giygas' spell, mistaking Anna for her own daughter, like every other mother here, desperately clinging on to the hapless girl with their filthy hands. The zombie-like adults seemingly begin fighting over her by pulling hair, scratching, biting, and landing bloody blows on one another. They've just about completely lost their minds. An overwhelmed Anna discharges a psi blast that sends anyone within a 20-foot radius around her flying, and is shocked to see that she inadvertently inflicted irreparable damage to fellow humans. We get a horrific account of what this feels like from Anna herself, as a second bout of that explosive energy is suppressed and redirected to course throughout her body. All of her blood seemed to boil, her bones seemed to grate against one another, and every one of her organs felt as though they've been turned into minced meat from some kind of terrible shock. And all of this pain echoed 5 or 6 times stronger. Her entire body became numb, as though it wasn't even her own anymore. Thinking she deserves to be punished for having sinfully used this great power, Anna welcomes the pain and endures the suffering until it stops, which turns her hair, she offered up to God earlier in prayer as a sacrifice, snow white. All this commotion is what causes Giyg to finally reveal himself. Housed in glass underneath his mothership are more adults, mindlessly calling out for their precious Giyg. It seems that without a mother to call his own, the alien threat has tried to fill the void by forcing all of Earth's mothers to love him instead. That was never going to replace the real thing, however, so with a time machine known as the ultimate reset button in his possession, Giyg's endgame is to send every single thing on Earth back to a state like being in a mother's womb all over again. The only thing our little heroes have on their side to match the might of his malevolence is the robot Eve, who was notably modeled after Lloyd's mom in the book, because she was built by Dr. Distorto, a generic enemy type from the game made into a single character here, that character being Lloyd's dad. Distorto is a cruel nickname given to Lloyd's father by Giyg, whose army disfigured the man for feigning loyalty. Lloyd's papa explains that like an insect, Giyg must retreat into a cocoon made out of his own body fluids at intervals during the course of his growth. Observing Giyg's hibernation habits is how he managed to escape from the mothership, but he didn't flee unscathed, as an Omega saucer brutally shot him down. The incident left him with facial scars, deformed legs, and the total loss of his right hand. The man became estranged from Lloyd to try and revive his mortally sick wife, Lloyd's mom, the real Eve, while pretending to join Giyg to restore his creation, the robot Eve, who swears in this book, which is unrelated but really funny to me. Honoring the tradition of not-so-great fathers in the Mother series, Distorto even felt contempt towards his son this whole time, because he always saw Lloyd as a coward with no willpower, so Lloyd feels understandably indifferent about whether or not they'll meet again. Getting back to Lloyd's artificial mother, Eve directly challenges the cosmic invader in combat, but this Titan's courage is tragically met with a body-piercing laser that brings her to ruin. It's certainly not all for nothing though, as from within the wreckage, a final melody begins to play. Adding far more elaboration than what was provided in the game, Giyg's birth mother is actually a major character in this story, and she was good friends with Ninten's great-grandparents, having presumably abducted his great-grandfather George and great-grandmother Maria as samples for some kind of experimentation. She was surprised to find a species of lesser Psi on the remote planet Earth, and became more interested in learning about them as people. Giyg's mother and Maria soon formed a deep connection and friendship with one another, because they were both expecting, and felt comfort in the idea of being mothers together. This was not meant to be though, as some urgent incoming disaster, translator Nyaasu decided to specify as being a comet, was heading towards Earth at the same time Maria started having contractions. Knowing it was the only way to save them, the alien mother used self-destructive Psi to stop the comet, sacrificing herself for the future of Maria's child. In return, Maria promised to incubate Giyg's egg and raise him like her own, but the baby's scheduled to hatch in about 150 human years, so Maria has to use a type of time capsule that runs on Psi power aboard the mothership to watch over the egg until he's born. Maria decided to stay on the ship and enter the time capsule, while George brought their own newborn baby back home on Earth, and started researching the secrets of Psi, in preparation for the inevitable day more visitors like Giyg will come again, in hopes that he can reunite with his wife one day. For the rest of George's lifetime, however, no other extraterrestrials presented themselves, and Psi remained an unsolvable enigma. Maria's plan didn't quite work either, due to the time capsule either being incompatible with humans, or the Earth's ever-changing climate. The strong Psi field on Giyg's ship eventually caused Maria to be reborn as Queen Mary, who created the sickly sweet realm of Magicant as a sort of baby's nursery. But Giyg hatched into our world, and Queen Mary had no recollection of her time as Maria, so there was no one to watch over him, with a certain fractured nostalgic song keeping the two separated. Singing the restored 8 melodies is the only way for Queen Mary to regain her memories of being human, which eventually allows her to re-establish a connection with the life form she loves so dearly, as they embrace and fly away in the starship to wherever Giyg's birth mother is. Giyg and Maria's conclusion was satisfyingly heartrending, but this is Dark Aspects, so we must undo that pretty bow because sadly I'm not leaving things wrapped up so nicely. My final talking point for today then is perhaps the weirdest thing I've ever had to talk about on the channel, which the author also saved for last, so don't blame me. That is to say, the closing few sentences of the novel. I want you to read these along with me, and think about how it all sounds without context. Anna nodded with powerful enthusiasm, while subconsciously, she gently stroked her lower belly. And somehow, her smile was not unlike that of Queen Mary. At the foot of the mountain, even the cherry blossoms were already blooming. Alright, I have 3 explanations for this. Firstly, and this is how I interpreted the meaning, is that this is purely symbolic. Throughout the novel, there's an underlying theme of Anna realizing just how amazing mothers are, and that she'd likely make for a wonderful parent one day. It's mentioned several times that she possesses an innate motherly instinct, and is described as being exactly alike Queen Mary, said to be the essence of all mothers combined in some ways. I think it'd make some sense for Anna to be rubbing the area around her navel, that's how it's directly worded in Japanese, as an odd way of foreshadowing her future destiny as a mother, while she's subconsciously thinking of what just happened with Maria and Giygas finally being at peace. The second explanation is the obvious, albeit upsetting one, where the line is taken literally. While we're never outright told anything obscene like that happened in the story, there was that hallucinogenic sequence with the cavern water, and would, if something unmentionable happened we weren't told about, unfortunately imply that Ken is the father. It's worth noting that in a previous chapter, there was focus on Lloyd and Anna being mistaken for a couple, while they were both picking up supplies at a supermarket while carrying Noelle. A stranger tells them, "Good for you, young'uns. Go on, keep at it. Romeo and Juliet were in their early teens too, you know, and we can't lose to the Europeans." This reaction inspired Lloyd to start talking about certain passionate feelings of love, as well as the intense urges particular to puberty. Note that this was the censored line by Nyaasu. Lloyd says intense sexual urges specifically in the original Japanese version. Anna is flustered by their conversation, and confides in Ken about it, who in turn gets embarrassed and turns red. This causes Anna to feel relieved, but also curiously lonely and disappointed. So she then responds with a deliberately wanton air, which is suspicious behavior for a 12-year-old girl. She was corrupted by that rock and roll music, I tell ya. If this wasn't Kumi's intention, and I hope it wasn't, I'm just going to pretend that Queen Mary gifted Anna a child in the spirit of the Virgin Mary. Rest assured, if Nyaasu is ever given the opportunity to meet the author, she will ask, "What did you mean by that, please?" With all that said, I hope I didn't just discourage you from reading or enjoying the book, because my thoughts about it are overall very positive. I had an absolute blast reading Saori Kumi's Mother, and I do recommend her story as a complement to the original. So does Shikasato Itoi, as it's presented by him. I personally love the descriptions of Sai, like Anna first realizing her offensive powers by acting as a lightning rod to the vast, untamed, powerful flow of energy circling the universe, collecting it. I'm also a big fan of all the little moments Kumi wrote in that successfulully feel very mother-like, such as the characters breaking the fourth wall a bit by critiquing Ken as he's describing Magicant, asking why he suddenly changed genres from sci-fi to fantasy. Then there's the subtle ways in which Kumi referenced the games, such as Giygas' inexplicable attack being a flash of something like red lightning, which somehow creates a pain in the kids' throats, while thinning the air around them as an attempt to stop their singing. Next time, I'm going to be diving into the arguably superior sequel novel, which is guaranteed to baffle any EarthBound fan. Winter 2021. On December 25th, 2021, literally Christmas Day, I first discovered that someone had translated both official Mother novels into English. My mind was blown as if a New Year's Eve bomb had just detonated 5 days early. That month was a crazy time for me. My wife and I did the most traveling we've ever done in our entire lives as part of some runaway road trip, where we drove cross-country from Arizona to West Virginia, where I researched the Flatwoods monster that inspired them from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask as part of another Dark Aspects series. Then from the mountain state to the green mountain state of Vermont to see her mom. After driving back home, we immediately flew out to Hawaii and back to visit my dad. Then finally headed east to Texas so we could spend Christmas with another side of the family. I know that sounds absolutely insane, and it kind of is. But what we didn't anticipate is getting stranded at my father-in-law's place due to some carefree guy hitting our parked car and bolting without leaving a note. The plan was to leave on the 26th, but with the front end bashed in and numerous problems now under the hood of our only way home, we had no choice but to wait on repairs after we finally found a mechanic who would take us during the holidays. The car was ready to roll again on New Year's Eve evening. I kid you not, we experienced multiple fireworks shows that night driving because of the time zone change setting us back an hour, but that still left us with 5 days with nothing to do. It was actually a bit of a blessing in disguise, besides the fact that our insurance doesn't cover a hit and run, since I could now dedicate all of my precious time reading these novels while my wife replayed Okami. The question for me was, which one? Mother, the original story, or Mother 2, Giygas Strikes Back? And since I know I'll get some comments, yes, I say Giygas, not Giygas or Giygas for a reason. See here for more details. Honestly, I had gleaned over Kenisu's newer translation of the first book and enjoyed what I read, but comparatively I hadn't heard anything about the EarthBound story besides how wild it gets, thanks to the sample live reading of Chewy's translation from the 2013 EarthBound Bash, a handful of short descriptions on EarthBound Central, and some fan art circulating online. Luckily, much like playing EarthBound before beginnings, you're not losing much of anything as they are two separate stories with little holding them together. However, whether that mattered or not was thrown out the window once Pokey Minch, a 14-year-old without a license or even a permit, started drifting in his father's Ferrari and ditched the luxury car as soon as he spotted the police, then suggested that Ness take the blame. With my transient life, I shall see this story through to its end, I thought, as I proceeded to read and read and read some more until I finished on December 29th. I've since reread the book so I could take notes and soak things in a second time, keeping the experience fresh in my mind as I write this script. Those initial 4 days of reading this thing for the first time with my undivided attention though is an irreplaceable memory I will forever cherish. And let me tell you, there are some story developments here that still shake me to my core. So if you have any interest in reading them spoiler free, this is your last chance to jump ship, swim to port, then crack open that laptop at the nearest Stoic Club with free Wi-Fi and get reading. Otherwise, grab onto your sandals because we're sailing straight towards the dark aspects in this kraken of a story. Something that should be of interest to fans comes up almost immediately with the introduction of Ness's father. While these paragraphs of new information about him don't outright deny the possibility that he's literally a phone, it's unfortunately very likely the dude is of flesh and bone, which is quite the revelation. Ness's mom, with her reportedly ample bosom, was a supermodel in her younger days, and his dad an important businessman working for Aloysius Minch, who owns the Minch supermarket chain. While working for the man, Ness's father had a little side project perfecting the ultimate hamburger for his son with an incredibly picky palate. That's right, Ness's favorite food in this interpretation is hamburgers, not Salisbury steak, and he has standards, which means trash burgers may be out of the question. Through hard work and trial and error, Ness's papa successfully created the world's most delicious hamburger that even his fussy son wouldn't be able to resist. A delicacy he aptly called Ness Burger. It was a big hit, so he founded a new restaurant chain that shares its name with its most popular menu item. Like if the Big Mac at McDonald's was also named McDonald's, using stocks of meat he'd bought up from Mr. Minch's stores. When Ness Burger was founded, Ness's father had been assertively given a loan by Pokey's dad. A nice way of providing context for the $100,000 or more, which is actually something like $100 million jillion in Japanese, he supposedly borrowed from Aloysius. In the novel, Mr. Minch put together an underhanded binding contract under the pretense of goodwill, which Ness's dad mistakenly signed on to, and now has the lion's share of his profits and reputation siphoned directly to Mr. Minch. The seedy agreement he's bound to forces Minch market advertisements to be printed all over the wrappers at Ness Burger, because Aloysius now has complete control over management and advertising decisions too. In an interesting twist, Mr. Minch is actually the reason Ness's father is absent from his son's life. In his anger, after failing to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula, the world's worst boss sent his wage slave to work overseas to keep him away from home, and eventually break the man in hopes that he'll spill the beans about his secret recipe. Basically, Ness's father skimmed the terms and conditions of the contract and inadvertently agreed to sign his life away to an old friend who turned out to be a sordid old pig. Mr. Minch even creepily has the hots for Ness's mom, offering to take her out to dinner at a high-class restaurant his father couldn't afford. His master plan involves using lower quality meat to tarnish the Ness burger name, in order to dispirit Ness's old man so much that he quits. Then, he'll take over the restaurants, charmingly renamed Pokey Burger, and restore sales to the highs they once reached. Aloysius is a conceited, manipulative shell of a man, but little does he know that his eldest son is about to unintentionally surpass his wickedness. You see, Pokey actually witnessed firsthand the infamous meteorite crashing on Mount Onett, recklessly driving that aforementioned Ferrari with Piggy in tow. The meteorite fragmented when it touched down on Earth and sent shards slamming into the windshield. The ground beneath them started violently shaking, so Pokey abruptly turned the wheel and Piggy was thrown out of the vehicle. A large piece of the comet then tore into the roof, and Pokey let out a terrible scream as it burst into light, so Piggy thought the car had exploded in flames. When Ness first encountered Piggy, he worriedly questioned if his older brother was still alive because he had already presumed the worst. A cold chill was sent down Ness's spine as Piggy asked if he seemed like the same brother he'd always known, the real Pokey. This is the first major red flag that something is seriously very wrong, but Ness and Piggy brush off his story and skepticism as a hallucination dreamt up when he passed out earlier. As Ness escorts the youngest Minch brother home, the side tutorial boss Starman Jr. makes his grand entrance disguised as Pokey. The alien menace puts his hands on his hips and laughs, which reminded me of the Mecha Porky sprites from Mother 3. The psychedelic battle background of the game is then amazingly contextualized in this story as the world wraps around our combatants and the atmosphere becomes heavy, with intense, sinister waves beginning to swell from the spaceman. I think even more so than the previous novel, this story does a fantastic job of recreating the feeling of turn-based RPG battles. After the Starman Jr. is evaporated thanks to everyone's favorite rhinoceros beetle, Buzz, who's a scientist of the future in this novel, serving the same purpose as his game counterpart, the meteorite is revealed to be an egg for a certain cosmic monster, Giygas. The intergalactic fiend used it to cross through space and time, hatching as soon as he arrived on Mount Onett. Nobody, not even Buzz, knows what Giygas' larval state looks like, but the intellectual insect is aware that the newly hatched Giygas will have assumed the form of your typical, average, everyday human being, likely having taken anyone who happened to be nearby as a host, which very unluckily turns out to be Ness's next-door neighbor, Pokey. Buzz goes on to explain that Giygas will grow inside the belly of the person he chose to carry him, controlling them from within via waves of evil influence that will also spread out into the surrounding environment. It's said that because Pokey already possessed a destructive personality before his little miracle, he will more easily mold into Giygas' puppet. Pokey's fate then is to allow this parasite to grow in his belly over the course of about half a year, until Giygas eats through him and the inexplicable monster emerges. Ness realizes right away that his old friend has become the mother to this abomination, and Buzz tasks the boy with eliminating him before Giygas is born, which yes, sounds like that infamous EarthBound fan theory I will not acknowledge any further. Ness has the opportunity to dispatch his frenemy very early on in the story, but instinctively hesitates because of their shared history. Before Buzz prepares to do the dirty deed himself, Lardna mistakes him for a dung beetle, then a cockroach, as she smashes his guts out with a slipper. From here on out, all other aliens, like the hideous, odious Master Belch, refer to Pokey as Giygas, which Pokey assumes means something like leader or god in their language, so it doesn't bother him. Since Pokey is in essence pregnant with an eldritch horror, that's a sentence I never thought I'd say, he inhumanly increases in size throughout the novel to a disturbing degree. Aloysius compares his condition to when Lardna was expecting Pokey, but this is no normal maternal weight gain, as Pokey, an already bigger kid to begin with, amasses an obscenely unnatural amount of fat in a short period of time. The description of his heaviness becomes truly disconcerting when his eyes and nose sink into his swollen cheeks, and every step brings him pain as his inflamed body chafes and works to shorten his breath. His face sags with countless folds of extra skin burying his neck. His fingers are described as fat, round little caterpillars that are later mistaken for sausages by some hungry riverfish, and his fingers are capable of bending the metal support in the armrest of his chair like putty. It's so bad that eventually the narrator has to simply start referring to Pokey as the fleshy mass, Towards the end of the book, there aren't any clothes that will fit him anymore, so he opts to wear 2 bath towels, amusingly adorned with Miffy Bunny, as an unsuccessful attempt to cover his massive body. During his transformation from portly to abnormally obese, his bloodshot red eyes begin bulging and his eyelids fitfully twitching as he stares off without focus. Midway through the story, Pokey inhales a can of cola until he chokes, which sends him into a coughing fit as his whole body falls into rhythmic shock. The veins in his neck swell and retract, his drooling mouth hangs open in anguish, while tears and sweat stream down his face. This book had me feeling bad for the most twisted troublemaking boy ever, which is quite the accomplishment. Pity for the same tainted soul that would go on to commit unredeemable acts of malice in the sequel game. It's a confusing feeling reminiscent of Mother 3's ending, where he locks himself into a fate worse than death. Pokey is not just a snot-nosed brat with a dark side in this novel, like he is in EarthBound. Giygas did clearly corrupt him in that game by amplifying his negative qualities, but there were no physical ramifications, besides perhaps his skin turning blue, unless he simply appeared that way inside of the spider mech through the glass. Regardless, that is not the case here, as Pokey's aforementioned ever-bulging body puts him through hell. He develops a ravenous hunger too, going as far as to eat a live, still wriggling fish in a daze as he promises to slaughter Ness, smiling with its blood smeared around the edges of his mouth. This unhinged behavior is a result of the Giygas larva festering inside of him, but there's another key to his amoral spiral, and perhaps why he's been able to survive: a primitive human effigy called the Mani Mani, sent by Giygas to help protect his host. This devil statue played a large part in EarthBound. It was first unearthed by treasure hunter Liar Exaggerate, but only really became a problem when it was sold to a gentleman known as Mr. Carpainter. Welcome to Happy Happy Village, home to insane cultists unhappy with the vibrance and varied hues of the world, following the crazed Mr. Carpainter and his decree that everything in the world shall be blue. It's both hilarious and uncanny, which is honestly a decent descriptor for most of the EarthBound experience in general. The game never really gave us a reason why this zealot took the lyrics of that Eiffel 65 song as scripture, other than him stating that the Mani Mani statue made him do peculiar things. It was instead Monotoli who gave us the most detailed information about how the statue works, explaining that it traps anyone under its influence inside an illusion it creates. The statue attracts wicked spirits that weaken the heart of its user, but also grants them an evil power. We learn through gameplay that the thing is sentient too, as it attacks with psi and can even neutralize its effects on the battlefield. The novel thankfully gives us even more to chew on, naming the notorious glorious light it emits the super aura. Carpainter uses the statue here to suffocate his followers in inordinate, euphoric blue-colored waves that make them convulse and/or scream with their eyes wide open. The relic is an invaluable treasure coveted by black market traders, prophesied to lead the people astray and drown them in captivating greed. It appears to perpetually heighten a person's desires, but Ness comes to understand later that it's simply a device fully exposing a person's truest potential, allowing them to perform at their highest possible limit. While the game never really gave us a sensical reason for Mr. Carpainter's obsession with the color blue specifically, the novel actually provides him with a backstory that explains how and why Happy Happyism was founded. When the cult leader was just a boy, he was very thin and sickly, having to take medication daily, with the nasty side effect of turning his face into a zombie-like blue color. His appearance and innate awkwardness scared off any potential friends, which left him so very alone. To cope with the isolation and to express his emotions, he became a painter, using only the color blue in his artwork to match his altered skin. His style began attracting those who were lost like him, those who could sympathize with his melancholy. Happy Happy Village then was conceived as a place where all who were troubled could live together in peace, but the Mani Mani distorted the innocent wish into a delusionary desire to conquer all and kidnap a certain special girl with psychokinetic powers to recruit as his own personal channeler, or high priestess in EarthBound. After not letting that happen by disbanding the unholy communion, Ness and Paula find themselves in another dire predicament when they take the trip to Threed. Paula nearly faints at the sight of some vile, unknown evil peering at them through the graveyard as they try to find a place they can spend the night. In bright neon letters, Hotel 3'd, briefly flickering to read Hell, brings Ness both relief and worry. But Paula's alarming condition overrides his superstitious fear. He ultimately checks into the totally not haunted hotel, assisted by a woman reminding him of Morticia Adams, and who seems to glide across the floor. This reads exactly like the opening of Luigi's Mansion 3 to me, with Helen gravely welcoming the unlucky hero and his friends to the last resort. This otherworldly lady, of course, is the mysterious zombie woman from EarthBound, shutting the two inside of room 237, probably. An exceedingly filthy chamber blanketed in numerous layers of moldy dust kicked up with each step, like Mother 3's dirty cafe. Pokey taunts them from behind the locked door, but thankfully a new ally is coming, the boy genius Jeff Andonuts, who gets an entire chapter dedicated to him. Chapter 4, Meeting Up with Jeff. Emphasis on the exclamation point sounds playful and innocuous, but it's actually the part of the story I would recommend to anyone who felt that Mother 2 should have had more heart-rending moments like 3.
Abbott, stay down! Stay down, Abbott! No! Stay down!
That might be confusing to hear because we aren't told about anything overtly tragic happening to him in the game, besides, Jeff's father sending the boy off to boarding school and not visiting him for 10 years or so. But the novel shakes things up by debuting a new character, Jack Andonuts, as Jeff's older sibling. He's introduced as Jeff's beloved older brother, so what could possibly go wrong? This version of Jeff has two handicapped legs fitted with heavy metal support bracers. He self-deprecatingly compares himself to Frankenstein, even though he means Frankenstein's monster, as he drags his leaden legs across the floor, but is determined to save a pair of friends he's never met, answering Paula's telepathic distress call even if it means crossing the ocean to do so. Since he'd have great trouble treading through the dense snow of winters, his schoolmates prepare a trusty hyper wheelchair that once belonged to the dormitory leader, the Great Hawking. Yep, this beauty is a spiked six-wheeled snowmobile / off-road bike hybrid powered by a solar battery. When he eventually, and just barely, makes the arduous trip to his father's laboratory, the boy is given prosthetic legs via surgery performed by a literal troglodyte. Jeff is injected with a sedative and falls into a deep sleep, notably apologizing to his father repeatedly. As you could probably guess, it is now time for the big sad, told through a flashback while Jeff is out cold. When he was a very young boy, he traveled with his father, his mother, and his dear brother to a resort for a vacation. That night, the boys stuffed themselves at a seafood restaurant on the harbor, finishing well before their parents, who weren't even done with their drinks. Romance was in the air, so Jack had the foresight to take Jeff and leave their parents to enjoy each other's company, suggesting that the two brothers check out the cruiser boat parked by the pier. The friendly ship captain invited the two on board for a tour, and Jack was especially ecstatic as boats were his hobby. He started a deep conversation with the crew, while Jeff was groaning in boredom and thought to slip away while no one was taking notice. He darted outside onto the deck and realized that while the back of the ship was filled with partygoers, the front was empty, so he decided to explore it. At the very tip of the ship's bow, there was a metal fitting in the shape of a ring fastened to it, used to moor the boat. Wanting to try tying a sailor's knot to this ring, Jeff pulled out the cord from the waistline of his parka and threaded it through. When his knot came out poorly, Jeff tried again using the strings from his hood, which of course resulted in him getting helplessly caught as he pulled the knotted cords together too tightly. As the ship prepared to dock, the crew began unraveling the mooring rope and lifting the anchor. Jack stepped outside to see his younger brother tangled in a mess of too tight twine even he couldn't undo, as he hurriedly ran to get help. The captain spotted the two boys towards the bow, which was supposed to be clear, and yelled out orders to the helmsman, who couldn't hear because of the cacophony of the orchestra and nearby fireworks being set off. The engine reverberated as the boat abruptly veered and rocked violently. This freed Jeff, though it sent him sliding across the deck and nearly overboard. Jack managed to catch him with one arm and the two landed on the dock, but the 3,000-ton cruiser came swinging back their way and crushed Jeff's legs between it and the beams of the dock. Jeff just about deafened himself with the sound of his own screams, while he stared into the eyes of his brother and watched the light fade from them as a streak of blood trickled down his lifeless body. Dr. Andonut's hair turned white overnight, while his wife collapsed to the floor in tears. Jack had been killed at just 15 years old. After the funeral, Jeff went to live at the dormitory while his parents divorced. their family was broken, as they couldn't continue living together without being reminded of what had happened. This is the novel's reason for why Jeff hasn't seen his father in years. His dad paid for his tuition, but hasn't otherwise reached out. Waiting for his father to at least send out a Christmas card, Jeff would write one to himself every holiday when it never came. After all these years though, the man clearly doesn't hate his youngest son. He tends to his wounds and aids Jeff on his quest by preparing the flying Skyrunner so that he may finally rescue his soon-to-be companions from their imprisonment. That hotel room they've been confined in for over 24 hours. Just as Ness and Paula begin bickering about the bathroom situation, i.e. the lack thereof, Jeff comes to save the day by crashing through the ceiling. When we last saw Pokey, he wished for Ness to go ahead and starve, panic, and piss himself to death before leaving. But he also mentioned a revolting creature from outer space named Belch, leader of the undead threat in Threed. In Pokey's own words, because Belch can use the Force or whatever, these ghouls are rising from their graves and wreaking havoc. Belch, the big old pile of barf, is pretty gnarly in EarthBound, but the adjectives of the novel do wonders in painting an even more nauseating picture. This Belch possesses hidden tentacles on his body. He can tear off pieces of himself to throw around, and is even able to spew acidic liquid that can melt people into a puddle of syrupy goop. True to his original character, the putrid puke demands fly honey, an out-of-this-world treat that can't otherwise be found on this planet, as flies thankfully don't make honey on Earth. But he insists on sensing its foulness somewhere nearby. The newly formed trio has to stop Belch, so the inhabitants of this town and the neighboring Saturn Valley can see the sunlight again. The people of Threed have also had their homes overtaken by evil spirits, like the zombie hotel owner, who are tormenting the innocents by causing blood to spray out of faucets, and apparently teaching T-bone steaks how to walk, all while Belch wallows in his own filth. Before Jeff and Apple Kid invent a temporary solution by drawing in and then trapping all of the zombies in the resident circus tent, the gang departs the departed, and stumbles upon the very last place you'd ever find me. As someone with contamination OCD, a hive containing tens of thousands of festering flies producing that rotten snack coveted by Belch. The myriad of flies are able to form into different shapes like a skull and crossbones, which reminded me of those annoying barricading bees from Yoshi's story. Nevertheless, the curious Jeff scoops up a sample and braces his nose for a showdown with the vomitous villain. Much like his role in the game, Master Belch enslaves the innocent alien race of Mr. Saturn's to work in his factory. In the book, his base was converted into a sweatshop/karaoke bar from a hydroelectric dam. And we're actually shown firsthand how cruelly he treats the Mr. Saturns when he mercilessly whips them by extending his pliable self. Thankfully, our heroes put a stop to this abuse by smacking that jar of fly honey straight into his face as an appetizer, then feeding him a main course of dry ice, PK freeze, and Jeff's super cooling gun to put him on ice. Besides those I've already mentioned, there are plenty more beefed up baddies and bosses throughout the journey. This includes Frank and his street gang, the Sharks, who nearly beat Ness to death. Seriously, their violence has been cranked up to 11. And the Kraken, a sea serpent Pokey picked out from a catalog as recommended by a Starman Super. It's just like the NME sales guy pitching lowly monsters to DDD from Kirby right back at ya, so he can clobber dat dare Kirby. Apparently, the Kraken in this interpretation is a studious creature who's been closely following human politics and has his own stance on the subject of gun control. Now that line reads just like dialogue from the game. As an aside, the book is filled with so many fittingly ridiculous moments like that, so if you ask me, I think that for the most part, the author really nailed Shigesato Itoi's tone. This isn't always the case, however, as I'll elaborate on in a bit with the owner of the Stoic Club. The real malevolence of this story, the Mani Mani, makes its grand return in Fourside as the Bio Ness Burger is rolled out by the Big Mean Minch. It's an exclusive menu item in the big city that's so powerfully addictive it causes consumers to become uncontrollably chaotic and aggressive, an impulse that only temporarily subsides as they wolf down more. The voracious demand for these burgers is responsible for traffic accidents, physical assault, and theft as hordes of hands push and shove their way to these bioengineered burgers that can be swallowed down in huge quantities without satiating anyone. The crowd eventually becomes an undulating mass of zombie-like junkies described as looking like a huge battleship on the water. They eat these lab-made burgers with a glazed look in their eye, devouring mountainous piles of food until they collapse in exhaustion and beg for an ambulance. Some of these victims to the Bio Ness Burger are none other than the entirety of the Runaway 5 band. Jeff deduces that everyone's insatiable appetite is a result of the bio-burger altering their minds, so he's able to reverse the runaways' rapacious cravings with the power of placebo. As it turns out, the burgers were laced with water exposed to recreations of the evil Mani Mani idol, nicknamed Mini Mini Mani Manis, so when Ness and company are ambushed by Pokey with his army of brainwashed wrestlers and karate masters, remember that part from the game? He uses Sai to melt and mangle one of the statuettes in his hands, which is revealed to have been made from the meteorite that crash-landed on Onett. This frees all affected in the vicinity from their stupor, as if they'd been exorcised of some kind of demon. Mr. Monotoli was one of these people, who promptly had his security guards retrieve the rest of the mini statues so that Ness could destroy them and save the city. Those who had severely damaged their stomachs or were injured by the drove of crazed gourmets were rushed to a hospital for recovery. Earlier on in the book, there's an amazing line from the Tucson doctor that cured Ness from his mushroomization, where he tells the kids that they should be careful and starts listing off dangerous things to look out for. Monsters, wild beasts, strange weather, perverts, scoundrels, a dungeon man. I laughed pretty hard at this, but he was serious, as that problematic club owner I mentioned before is a pervert who introduces himself to Ness, a 12-year-old, in an uncomfortable, inappropriate manner when the trio arrive at Summers. Thankfully, nothing more comes of this, but yeesh is what I have to say on the matter. While Paula accidentally gets drunk on champagne in their luxurious hotel suite and passes out while cocooned in the bedspread, yes, that actually happens, Ness and Jeff are left to brave the creep secret society to try and win back a ship captain's boat, which was lost in a bet. While the Stoic Club is still a private club for esteemed individuals to drink nothing but mineral water, the novel version is an undisclosed association under the ocean reserved for the rich elite who have already crossed off everything on their bucket lists. These aristocrats have become depressed with nothing really left to live for, though the public spotlight still shines on them. Rather than intellectuals philosophizing over the inevitable collapse of capitalism, the Stoic Club here acts as a refuge for these superstars to do nothing and be boring without judgment. According to the owner, this brings them happiness, but the waiter also darkly mentions that their members often request poisoned water, which he refuses to serve, hinting that plenty of them have already attempted suicide. Jeff is tricked into downing one of the supposedly drugged drinks in a game of Russian roulette and faints, entering what I initially interpreted to be something like his own magicant. Ness and eventually a sober Paula, along with Pooh, the last of the chosen four they haven't met yet, use some kind of psi astral projection to follow and enter what I thought to be Jeff's headspace. I'll reveal what it actually is later. Here, they witness the troubled boy finally making peace with his deceased brother, when Jack removes a likely metaphorical rope, literally materialized in this ethereal realm, hanging around Jeff's neck. This mystifying near-death experience conveniently allows Jeff to overcome his fear of large boats, and saves face in regard to the Stoic Club owner's carelessness via almost murdering a child. The server didn't actually lace the waters with anything but lemon, but the owner didn't know that at the time. Having snapped the culpable man out of his funk, the children, which will soon include Pooh, PK teleporting himself to the scene in real time, score that ship so they can sail to Scaraba. Following a sad, familiar story about natives losing their land and homes to foreign settlers, then being forced to acclimate to a new way of life, we learn that Pokey and his father crash-landed their helicopter in the jungle due to Pokey suddenly growing in size again like Kirby eating that 200th strawberry in Dream Buffet. The dastardly duo had to dump all of the cash they made from their exploits in Tucson and Forsyth to try and match the weight limit again. But it was fruitless, as they're now stranded in the aforementioned village that's since been abandoned due to its people relocating. The Mani Mani statue had already been surfacing Aloysius' obsession with money, to the point where he cared more about future earnings than his son suddenly collapsing onto the floor in a previous chapter. But now that he's completely without his fortune, the man has gone certifiably insane. He skips meals to fanatically cut palm fronds down to the size and shape of dollar bills, then carefully counts them as if they were real currency. Pokey's even worried enough to tell him to eat, but his father is so entranced by his delusions that he continues on, until ultimately he starves to death. You heard that right. Pokey uses a bent steel plate from the helicopter as a makeshift grave, inscribing the following: Aloysius Minch, 1943 to 1994. See you in hell, you scrawny, greedy bastard! That means there will be no visiting the man drinking his sorrows away at Jackie's Cafe when the war against Giygas is over. Aloysius Minch is dead. This is also around the time we learn that, surprise, Aloysius was never the greatest father, even before the Mani Mani's influence. Ness's dad was actually more of a father figure to Pokey, and so the two boys spent a lot of time together as if he were a member of their family. However, with Pokey being 2 years older than Ness, these friends couldn't go to school together, which meant Pokey was left alone to be callously bullied by his peers. Aloysius only did what he knew best, and spent money, rather than time, on his kid. So Pokey resorted to stuffing his face to fill that hole in his heart, which ultimately made the situation worse. As Pokey gained weight and stopped studying, classmates were given more ammunition. The fear and anxiety he once felt upon being mocked soon turned to seething hatred for everyone around him, and he became violent because he could, as Aloysius would again just throw money at the problem and cover his misbehaving son whenever he injured somebody. Pokey quickly became the most despised kid on the block by his contemporaries, so Ness eventually stopped playing with him too, ignoring his old friend as if he didn't exist. Pokey's just a dumb pig after all. Yeah, a pig. Piggy Pokey. Pokey pork. I bet they sell that in family-sized packs at your father's supermarket. These specific cruel words from his bullies really worked to set up Pokey's fixation on pigs in Mother 3, when he learns to embrace the hatred so that he can redirect it to make everyone else suffer under the oppressive rule of his pig-themed empire. I do really wish there was a third novel now, but as you'll see, the ending of this book, along with other factors Saori herself outlines here, would have made adapting the third game tricky anyway. During an incident where Pokey failed to flip over a vault bar in front of his tormentors, and Ness, who he considered to be a little brother, they all ran over to kick the poor kid while he was down. Ness didn't know what to do. Should he act with courage and face this gang of bullies, who were all older than he was? Pokey glared at Ness with a look of complete disdain, and in a panic, the young Ness chose flight. He shut his eyes and ran away, proof that their friendship had truly torn apart. At that moment, Pokey had vowed to never ever forgive Ness. Suppressing that memory for now, the Chosen Four learn that they must transplant their brain programs, aka spirits, into robots to fight Giygas, who's preparing for his birth in the rift between the dimensions. In the game, Dr. Andonutz offers the modest explanation that the phase distorter machine they must use to confront him cannot warp life forms because life is demolished in the time travel process. In the book, both the Great Talking Rock of the Lost Underworld and a Starman Super are given the role instead, elaborating further by explaining that living things cannot pass through the rift in time, because beyond the rift, all time exists in chaos, from the first breath of life in the universe to its inevitable death and eternal darkness. The vortexes in time would instantly squeeze out all of the cells in one's body, annihilating them completely. The book also gives us insight as to why the Mr. Saturns are on Earth. A strange whirlwind overtook their interstellar craft, along with reasoning for why our ancient ancestors and cryptids like Tessie are currently coexisting with modern humankind. The answer to the latter lies beyond space and time, which is where the Four can now go in that newly invented phase distorter. Pokey and Giygas are not on this planet anymore. They're not in this galaxy, nor are they even in this timeline. Once Giygas is born, he can assume his complete form and conquer over the entire universe, which includes all of time and space. Tragically, albeit hilariously, the Starman Super knows he's just a pawn to Giygas, but has an elderly mother, a sickly wife, and 3 starving children back home, all waiting for him to send them his paycheck. When Ness and his friends hear the news that their living bodies must be thrown away so that their souls can be transferred into robots to survive the journey, we're given a painfully despondent exchange between Ness and Paula about the future they'll have to give up for the sake of the world. Ness, having decided to endure the mission alone, tries to take in the beauty of his surroundings one final time, but Paula and the others will not let him go solo, of course. Like a 4-leaf clover, their destinies are inseparable as equal parts to a whole. Disturbingly, only a couple of pages later, we're filled in on the actual details of their surgery, rather than them lying down in a dark room while the screen flashes to the sound of a drill machine. The good doctor has a plan to cryopreserve their bodies once the souls have been successfully removed. Luckily, the Mr. Saturns have a thorough understanding of what a soul actually is and how it works, but they all have trouble explaining it in terms a human would understand. Pooh and his inborn spirituality are also instrumental to the transferring process, because having a god residing in him, oh, did I not mention that yet? He's able to pass into the realm of the dead, which they've been to before, as the place I mistook for Jeff's magic ant. So yes, Jeff was genuinely visited by his brother from heaven then. Some Mr. Saturns put on surgical masks. Imagine this being the last thing you see before being put under the knife. And raise their gloved hands. Yep, they've got hands in this novel too. Then give the kids an injection, while the air fills with nitrous oxide. The Mr. Saturn-shaped space-time transporter seems to work sort of like the time machine from H.G. Wells' fiction, in that it floats in place as a center point while the universe flows past it, until the newly roboticized heroes pass through three-dimensional space, and land inside the center of the Earth, which is where Ness's final Your Sanctuary is located. The rift in time they enter is apparently where all timelines in multiple dimensions converge to perish and be reborn, where all meaning in the universe can be found. This is where the legendary Carbon/Diamond Dog boss is fought, but rather than it being a long and grueling battle, Ness the robot just kind of points his metallic finger in the air and obliterates it in mere seconds with more power than he meant to use. With that show of strength, Pooh reveals that Ness has become a master, as if he had maxed out his stats in an RPG. When Ness records the melody of the Fire Spring, he finally accesses his magic ant, which plays out just like it does in the game at first, but then goes horribly wrong, as it focuses on what was only a minor part of Ness's dream world in the game, Pokey. The two ex-friends drift through the cosmos together and begin to talk things out, but Pokey refuses to believe that Ness ever actually liked him. So in this dreamscape, he transports the both of them to that fateful day on the school playground with a Volt Bar. Ness watches his child self run away from the abused Pokey, as the memory loops again and again while his guilt manifests as a giant Pokey incessantly shouting what Ness did wrong. The bullying progresses to a deranged degree, as Ness tries to do what he didn't then and stop them, but it's too late, as the light leaves Pokey's eyes and suddenly, a nightmare sequence rears its ugly head. The sun bursts, the earth trembles, and the sky shatters as a shower of blood gushes out of the older kids. A vortex of swirling black clouds appear and lightning strikes the schoolhouse, as windows smash and the building crumbles while children fall to the ground or are swept up in a whirlwind. One child's limbs are ripped off and blown apart, while another's face is savagely torn away. It hurts! A little boy cries as his entrails hang out from his stomach. Quote-unquote fun fact, in EarthBound, that same haunting line of dialogue from Giygas' final battle was actually directly inspired by a traffic accident series creator Shigesato Itoi witnessed firsthand a long time ago. Back then, he saw a young woman lying on the ground, and instead of saying, "I can't breathe" or "help," she just cried out, "It hurts." This really disturbed him, so the line was included because he thought it'd make the player reluctant to attack Giygas, even though he's the enemy. This particular M-rated horror does not cease until the reason behind these horrible visions is destroyed, the original Mani Mani, as it takes on the form of Ness. Using PK Rockin' to utterly destroy the golden relic for good, its ultimate illusion dissipates, and Ness wakes up to another round of horror, although it isn't gory this time. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the final battle. A showdown between the robotic Ness and his metal friends against the colossal Pokey from before, except he's even bigger now, and stark naked. His insurmountably obese body is described as a fleshy pink wall before them, verified by Pooh as he pokes the puffed up tower of Pokey and it jiggles profusely. His belly is so swollen it looks as if he had swallowed the moon. That inflated, stiffened body has become more reminiscent of a Marysville/Thanksgiving Day parade float than a human being. Enraged over the destruction of his beloved Mani Mani, Pokey begins thrashing about with his unbendable arms and legs as the reality around them begins to wobble and distort. Suddenly, the pink wall that makes up Pokey stretches to close the heroes in from all sides, like a padded cell meant to contain otherwise unrestrainable prisoners. The floor, ceiling, and walls, all part of this boundless Pokey, bounce our heroes around like tin toy robots on a trampoline. All of their moves, from Psy to bottle rockets, bounce off the bloated blubber to no effect, while Pokey cackles and his flesh undulates. Pokey then begins to contort himself, sending his enemies crashing together as he squeezes his skin to crush them. The Chosen Four's metal bodies are flattened against one another until they're irreparably bent out of shape and pressed into one. seeing the light at the end of the tubby tunnel. Their mashed, conjoined bodies do bring their souls closer to each other, so as a last hope, they begin praying to God, then for the support of all who have helped them in their journey from Onett to the deep darkness. Their combined, trans-dimensional prayers resound all throughout the world and inspire anyone listening to pray for the safety of Ness and his friends. That includes you, the reader, just like it did when you started praying for them while holding that Super Nintendo gamepad, or whatever controller was plugged in when you emulated the game. Anyway, your own trans-dimensional prayer, combined with everyone else's in this universe, causes the four to become enveloped in a pure white flame. As it spreads, tiny beads of light, seen earlier in the Fountains of Life by Ness's Your Sanctuaries, work to push back the walls of flesh and open a space for the four to escape. Pokey begs for them to stop, as he clutches his stomach in agony until he pops. Now this is really disgusting. What happens next is described as a sock turning inside out, except the sock is your surroundings. The exhausted party finds themselves alive and free from that pinkish nightmare realm, but miraculously, so is Pokey, although he's not doing so hot as Giygas is now ready to be born. You see, Pokey's body hadn't actually towered and twisted around them. It was a hallucination brought on by the rift, and also probably Giygas. Pokey is still left grabbing at his stomach in torment then, as he starts to heave and projectile vomits about a gallon of sickly greenish-yellow liquid all at once. Like a horror film, again, Pokey's jaw is wrenched open and Giygas begins to emerge from within.
It hurts, kill me please, while it's still inside my body. Kill both of us, it and me. I don't want to become a monster.
Pokey cries in desperation as four thick, writhing, spider-like legs sprout out. Unfortunately, that's all we see of Kumi's interpretation of the incomprehensible king of demons that is Giygas. As the universal cosmic destroyer crawls out of its mother, the book transitions into another illusory sequence set in a baseball stadium, which involves Ness landing a perfect fastball pitch. I interpret it to be Giygas himself, dead center. He has successfully hit a grand slam home run, with his three friends as the base runners. As Ness cheers with great enthusiasm, the champions wake in Dr. Andonet's lab as their regular non-android selves. I'll try to make this as simple as possible, but primarily what happened, as explained by Buzz, who's no longer dead, is that the reality our protagonists now find themselves in is a parallel world that overlapped and merged with the previous one. From here on out, they exist in an alternate universe, which is principally exactly the same, albeit with some changed variables, as Jeff so eloquently puts it. The world they were in before didn't disappear, it converged with another to become this slightly altered reality. In this new world, Jeff's parents, for example, had never divorced, and he'd always been an only child. But when Jeff sees his mom, he learns that she's pregnant with a baby boy she plans on naming Jack. Buzz explains that Giygas has slunk back into some abyss in the many universes, and that the rift in time has been closed, and it will not open again for at least another 1,000 years. His egg, i.e. the comet, never fell on Mount Onett, and Pokey was never made into his host. This does also mean that the Mr. Saturns never came to planet Earth, but the bee who's not a bee knows that Jeff and his father will build another, safer type of phase distorter in the years to come, so he promises that they'll be able to make contact once again. The other major difference in this reality is that Aloysius and Pokey are alive and kicking. However, the former is no longer the big boss of Minch supermarkets, having been imprisoned for crimes of embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraud. The president of the business is now Ness's father, who's allowing Picky and Lardna to rent their houses from him, rather than the other way around. Notice how I didn't say Pokey just now. That's because in this reality, he isn't part of the Minch family. He has always been the big brother of Ness and Tracy instead, and he's a far better person because of his positive upbringing. That's right, in the author's own words, mother has become brother. In Kumi's world, Ness and Pokey are canonically siblings by blood. What an ending. After reading this, I had one major question. If that hypothetical Mother 3 novel by the same author did exist, how would it work in terms of Pokey being the main antagonist? I think that it's still possible, as Giygas is technically alive. He'll just need another 1,000 years to escape his prison between dimensions, an amount of time that absolutely tracks. While the time span between both games is never specified, it's speculated that it could very well be a millennium. based on Leader's speech and certain comments from Pokey, who has become immortal. I can't imagine Mother 3 without a pseudo-Nazi pig empire, so perhaps Giygas could simply take the form of King P, since this almighty abomination must have retained the memory of its host from the original timeline. The only other question I'm left scratching my head about is how in the world Giyg from the first novel became this spider-like beast. His change in appearance was hardly explained at all in the game, but one can sort of fill in the blanks. I always presumed Giyg went insane after his confrontation with Ninten and the loss of Maria. Then he somehow gained more power than his body and mind could ever hope to contain. But that doesn't happen in the novel. Giyg leaves with Maria in peace. I guess I'll just have to regretfully throw my shoulders up into a shrug and chalk this enigma up to this book exists in an alternate reality to the first one. Curiously, Giygas' millennia-long revival in this novel can be likened to Ganon from the Legend of Zelda series and his unending cycle of reincarnation, or It, the similarly incomprehensible creature from the mind of Stephen King, who lies dormant for a set amount of years before resurfacing and pursuing its victims. The comparisons stem from the kids learning via a prophecy that 1,000 years prior to the present day, the ancient people of Scaraba built their pyramid in order to fight off Giygas the first time. But he was not fully destroyed, and they correctly predicted that his evil intent will be resurrected. With the final chapter completed and the book, or laptop, closed shut, I'd like to take a minute to discuss my closing thoughts on both of Saori Kumi's Mother novels, and how they stack up against one another. Mother. The original story was a surprising, fun read that made lots of interesting choices to separate itself from the game, that could be seen as good or bad. I quite liked the decision to tell the story from Anna's perspective, and appreciated Giygs' character arc, but I wasn't crazy about Ninten or Teddy's characterizations, though the former unquestionably rocked the boat and made for lots of funny, unexpected moments. Overall, I enjoyed the story as an alternate take on Mother, but understand why it may not be every fan's cup of tea. On the other hand, you have this book, which has some similarly eye-opening deviations, but in my opinion nails every villain and main character while expanding immensely on the stories of the supporting cast who didn't have much to work from in the first place. The direction Kumi took with our antagonists was genius. I loved every single scene with Belch, Aloysius, and Pokey, besides perhaps that finale. There's one part midway through the novel where Pokey is flipping through radio channels, and lands on a heavy metal station because he can relate to the lyrics about wanting to go to hell. How can you not love that? Backing up to my somewhat negative opinion of the climax, I realized Pokey excessively gaining an impossible amount of weight had to lead up to something, but I think it went a bit too far, and Giygas should have emerged sooner for a cosmically scary fight akin to the game, rather than remaining dormant for an end battle that's just kinda gross. The gang fighting an infinitely enormous nude Pokey in place of Giygas isn't anything I would have guessed in a million years, and it's fun to talk about, so the change has got appeal in that sense, I suppose. I can't complain too much though, especially considering the amazingly shocking Giygas-like horror stuff from Ness's Magicant that came right before this final face-off. Fans often dream about what an EarthBound animated movie or television series would look like, and I think that with some tweaks to a few key moments from this novel, the answer is right here. If it were up to me, I'd certainly add Moonside back in. Remove the more questionable content like the predatory folks in Summers, also maybe skip that segment about Pooh being basically already married to a 7-year-old he's been betrothed to since birth, then revamp the ending to better match the video game. Otherwise, I'm fine with the progression of the events as they happen here, and I think that adapting these moments could truly make for something special. All in all, I think that Mother fans should at least try reading one of these two books. Go for whichever one sounds more appealing. Again, order doesn't matter, and read the first few chapters. If I had to recommend one over the other, I'd choose Mother too, as I really enjoyed it and think Kumi got most of the characters right where it counts. The plot thoroughly captivated me from beginning to end in its own right too. I had only a rough idea of what was coming next, and that's awesome. It surprised me as a die-hard fan. Please let me know if you've already read these books or plan to in the future. Believe me when I say that even with all these spoilers, I left out lots of details you'll never know about unless you read them for yourselves, so we can chat about the crazy adventures based on these crazy couple of games. Special thanks to Nyaasu Nekoban for translating the novels in the first place, along with the following for creating the fan art showcased in this video. And finally, to my wonderful Patreon supporters, Brian and Susan, Jennifer, Kathleen, Caleb, Dat Barry, Tori, Janssen, and Dr. Cross. See you all for more in this series with dark aspects of Mother, Invasion from the Unknown, and an upcoming remake of my videos about the Agota Kristoff book trilogy that inspired Mother 3. Thank you so much for watching.